Good morning, everyone. As you join our webinar today, I'd like to welcome you to Issues That Matter, Recognizing Anxiety and Depression in Our Kids. I'm Krista Worley, and I'm a librarian with Snow Isle Libraries. This event is brought to you by Snow Isle Libraries and supported by the Snow Isle Libraries Foundation. We are so pleased that you are taking the time to join us here this Saturday morning. The situation that's created the need for social distance and coming together here online instead of in person has also given us the topic for this year's Issues That Matter series. We're talking about pandemic pressures and supporting the community and family mental health. Oh, we've all been feeling a bit of existential exhaustion. How do we know when we need to do something different for our mental health? As we get older and go through developmental stages, there seems to be a normal range of behavior changes. How do we know what is outside of that normal spectrum? And when everything does not feel okay, how do we know that we are and that our kids are? Our panelists this morning will answer these questions and as many of yours as they can. During this presentation, your microphones are muted and you can enter your questions and comments into chat at any time. Those questions and comments will be visible to only the panelists and our Snow Isle Library staff, Jackie and Andy, helping me out today. They'll collect the questions for the Q&A part of the event. We understand that this topic can be very personal, and we will do our best to ensure that your questions remain anonymous. If your question is for a specific panelist, please let us know. Jackie will also be sharing links to resources and library information in the chat screen throughout the event. This morning's program will be recorded for later viewing and will be available on the Snow Isle Library's YouTube channel within the week. And a big thank you to our panelists for taking the time to be here this morning. This event could not have happened without you. Please welcome Emily Foreman, school psychologist at Meadowdale Middle School in Linwood, Amy Garrett, pediatrician at Pediatric Associates of Whidbey Island in Oak Harbor, and Sarah Pulliam, Director of Family and Community Services at Child Strive in Everett. Emily, will you be willing to start us off today and tell us about yourself and your perspectives on this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Emily. I'm a school psychologist at a middle school in the Edmonds School District. I have some notes here I'm looking at. So working with middle schoolers, a big part of my job is helping kids and parents to recognize and manage anxiety and depression. It's also something I've dealt with myself, and so it's like I have a personal perspective as well. I think it can look very different in different people, but there are some commonalities to look out for if you're worried about your child. So I would definitely start to pay attention, like anytime that you notice a significant change in your kid's typical behavior, personality that's lasted for, a couple of weeks or longer. It can for sure be more difficult to tell in adolescence, since some degree of that change is typical, and some of the, kind of like grumpiness and things like that is sort of a natural part of that time of life. But at the same time, adolescents tend to have a bit more language in order to tell you what's going on with them. So sometimes that can be helpful. Some common signs that we would look out for, especially in adolescence, is irritability, poor concentration, eating or sleeping changes or disruptions, school avoidance for sure, and physical complaints is something I notice a lot. So a lot is saying that they have a stomach ache a lot of the time, lots of headaches, and crying easily, things like that. The pandemic has absolutely increased the risk of experiencing anxiety and depression in adults and kids, and for lots of reasons. Even when I was putting together my notes and making, a list of all these things, it was overwhelming just to list it out. But we have increased social isolation. The kids may have experienced deaths of people close to them for COVID or other reasons. There's less things in general to focus on, like just less happy, enjoyable things to focus on. So you may be spending more time ruminating on negative thoughts in your head. There's definitely a sense of a loss of control on your life, and which can lead to like an increase in some anxiety type disorders like eating disorders, OCD type behaviors. We have an increased fear of germs going on, really difficult like to see a hopeful end or an outcome. We've also had an increase in just the visibility of seeing or experiencing racism and racist attacks recently. So none of these things automatically mean a person would become anxious or depressed or have a disorder, but it all makes it more likely. So when you're talking to kids about their concerns with any of these things, I would try to keep your explanations and whatever materials you want to use age appropriate, but still honest and not sugar coated or like dumbed down. Kids will be able to tell, especially with the access to the internet that they have now, and they just have a sense of that when we're trying to kind of pull one over on them or keep something from them. And they will seek out their information elsewhere. So it's better to just kind of have the honest conversation. And it's definitely okay to say that you don't know something or like, let's look into that together. I think that's really powerful for kids to recognize that adults don't have all the information all the time, but that you're going to help them to seek out an answer. Another thing I would say that just to keep in mind is that talking about anxiety can be very anxiety producing. It took me a really long time to ask my doctor as an adult. It took me a really long time to ask for help. So being a kid, I think it's even harder. And when you don't fully understand yourself yet or know if it's normal or not, what you're feeling. I have had a lot of kids that I've brought things up to kind of point blank, and they'll get really mad at me or just deny that they're experiencing any kind of anxiety symptoms at all, even when it seems really clear that they are. Like they've come down to the nurse's office every day this week with a stomach ache, and you know, I can tell that's probably what's going on, but they're not ready to talk about it yet, and me forcing that on them isn't going to help. They might not even really have language to talk about what's going on. So sometimes I'll speak in a more indirect way, like, okay, well, when I feel this way, I try to do these things, or like, let's just go on a walk together and see how that feels. And it can kind of help move the conversation forward without being directed at them or kind of forcing them to admit that they aren't feeling good. And then I would just say to not be afraid if you aren't sure to ask your kid's doctor or school counselor, school psychologist, whoever, for help, because sometimes it is really hard to tell if you're an expert on your own child, but like people who work with kids have seen a full range of sort of typical behavior for whatever age group. And so they can kind of help you to tell whether this is kind of a typical change that's going on, or if it's something we maybe just need to help support. And so I do have some resources that I provided. The Edmonds School District has a webpage of mental health resources in multiple languages. So if you're curious, there's stuff for all different ages on there that you can do together, just information, even some hotlines and things to call. I also have a PDF that I provided from the National School Psychologist Organization, which is talking specifically to kids about COVID. And then I also provided a little slide deck, which actually are slides that I use with my students in a couple lessons that we do, talking about what is anxiety and what is depression. So the slides would be geared at having that conversation with kids, and like, this is what you might feel in your brain and body and things like that. And I think that's all for me for now.
Thank you, Emily. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Garrett. I'm a pediatrician. I've been practicing for about 20 years, not always in Oak Harbor, but for the past 7 years in Oak Harbor on the northern end of Whidbey Island. I want to thank Snow Owl Libraries for putting this really timely topic together and bringing us together so we can learn from each other and help our young people. I'm also a mother to a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old, and like Emily, have personal experience with struggles with mood and mental health. And I think that's an important disclosure because we've been there. And I think it informs how we address our families and our children. As a pediatrician, I take care of birth to about 24 years old. So a huge spectrum. And this has certainly been a difficult time. We see at least daily increases in chronic suicidality or thoughts of suicide. We've seen skyrocketing numbers of eating disorders, skyrocketing numbers of disordered sleep, and much higher numbers of postpartum depression, and of course, parental anxiety and depression, which affects the children as well, including the infants. There really is no lowest age that this time that we're in is not affecting. And we could talk more about that later. But it's just been so isolating for everybody. And it's not just the isolation of the pandemic that we're seeing effects of. We are seeing the effects of our national divisions and disparities. And it's something the children are aware of and see on TV or see on social media. And it's something that we also have to reckon with, along with the lifestyle changes that our pandemic has brought us. This is all on a background of a shared culture in the United States where we have tended to become more shallow in our relationships with each other, and have had a tendency to be always thinking of the next thing. And we pride ourselves on being independent and not needing help from others. And really what we need right now is how to be present to each other and to our own selves in the moment, how to self-reflect, how to express not big, huge dreams necessarily, which are still important, but just these small everyday goals, little baby steps. And I think that's hard for us as a culture in general, because that's not what's been as important in the past and emphasized. But I think we have an opportunity now to revisit these things, to reprioritize what's important in our personal lives, in our family lives, and in our culture. And learn how to ask for help, learn how to remove judgment of ourselves and judgment of others, which I think we're really good at. And so we can try to reframe this and restructure our approach to ourselves and our children and reconnect and be present. Going into this pandemic and this era, the #1 cause of death in our country for children ages 15 to 19 is accidents, unintentional injuries, whether it's overdoses or access to violent means that they don't mean to hurt themselves, but they do. Of course, motor vehicle accidents and other kinds of accidents. The same is true for the age group 10 to 14. The #2 cause of death in both of these age groups is suicide. And I think we have an opportunity to learn how to prevent that and address it and not avoid it, not be afraid of it. And our conversation, I hope today, will help us in that direction and definitely help each other by having this conversation. Some important resources that I want to share with you. They both come in at least English and Spanish. One is healthychildren.org, What I like about this resource is it's divided into ages and stages from prenatal all the way to young adulthood. Whether you have questions about sleep or nutrition or behavior, it's wonderful because you can look things up by ages and stages. There's also an entire separate section on emotional disorders through the ages and stages, and an entire section on pandemic related, COVID-19 related questions, whether it's how to help your child of a different age wear a face mask, or how to help them with their anxieties about getting sick or about their parents getting sick. I want to acknowledge that a lot of children we see are being raised by their grandparents, and that's been an extra special stressor for these children because their grandparents are at increased risk for COVID-19 infection. And maybe even they have had decreased access to well child care if where they go for care doesn't offer telemedicine, because their grandparents don't want to necessarily increase their exposures. So healthychildren.org is a great resource. Another wonderful resource is on Seattle Children's website. There is an entire section on health and keeping kids healthy during the pandemic and how to support mental wellness and family life during COVID-19. It's outstanding, and I think that's an excellent resource. There are some apps that I want to introduce to you as well, if you're not familiar with them. One is the Headspace app, which has activities, short videos, meditation exercises for children and adults of all different ages. And their age appropriateness, I find, is excellent. Another excellent app is Vroom, V-R-O-O-M, for encouraging development and parent-child connection relationships from the ages of 0 to 5 years old. And two apps that directly address crisis and suicidal thoughts are My3, MY, the number 3, and Stay Alive. And I look forward to answering other questions. Thank you. I want to introduce you now to Sarah Pulliam with Child Strive.
Thanks, Dr. Amy. I'm going to share my screen. I am pretty passionate about this topic, and to keep me on track, I thought slides might help. So I know that this is kind of where a lot of us are feeling right now in terms of our supporting the young people in our lives. I know at my house we have 4 daughters who are between the ages of 11 and 19, and there have been for sure tantrums and stony silences and petty arguments breaking out and nightmares and shouting and tears. And I'm just talking about myself so far, okay? So the real most important message I really want to share with parents and caregivers today is that our kids really do depend on us to set the tone. And if we're not taking care of ourselves, it's very, very hard, if not impossible, to take care of the kids around us. So that little asterisk that I've put in my slides, if you see it, it just is a reminder that, hey, this is a very important point for us as a reminder to take care of ourselves. So I work at Child Strive, and our main demographic is children prenatally through about the age of kindergarten. And I did want to echo what was mentioned before, that prenatally pregnant people really do need to have access to supports such as medication and counseling, because starting a parenting journey when you're already feeling anxious or depressed or a little paranoid or a whole host of emotions that are getting in the way is just not a great place to start. Infant mental health is completely tied to our own mental health. It is based in the relationship that we share. So what the main pathways that are forming in the infant brain. It's all done through interaction and relationship. And right now, what I see a lot of parents doing, and fair enough, it's a form of coping, but turning to that screen and kind of focusing on social media or news or whatever it is as a coping mechanism, it's really having an impact on infants because they need us, they need our eyes, they need our expressions, they need to know that we're connecting with them. So one of the things that can happen is that infants stop trying to bid for our attention if it's not being very effective. And that's kind of the main reason for depression in very young children. So signs of concern could just include a kind of apathy or neediness, extra neediness, fussiness, or losing a skill that they've already mastered. So such as a toddler who'd been, up to different things, not being able to do those again, or acting like a younger child. But the good news is, I went ahead. The good news is that that particular age group is very, very resilient. And so really building in extra time to play, sing songs, look at board books together, that's something that can really help bring a child who's on the cusp of depression back into kind of shared life together. And then younger children, they're actually built in, they're still pretty moody, so it can be very hard for a parent to know what's going on. But similar to what Emily mentioned, we're really looking for patterns in behavior and looking at the context. So of course, kids are going to get burned out and tired at different points. What you're really wanting to look for is this a persistent pattern? Is my child's irritability or difficulty kind of settling in? Is that something that I'm seeing periodically, or is it coming up with predictability? This age group, they're really looking to us to help them figure out ways to cope with the stress. And so it's a perfect time for us to be very transparent about our own feelings, not with all the details behind them, but just like, man, I am so frustrated right now. I feel like stomping my foot. When I stomp my foot, sometimes I feel a little bit better. Or just finding other ways to let kids know that it's completely fine to have a wide variety of feelings. That's part of being human, and that they actually can find some ways of coping and develop skills for dealing with those feelings. When in this very younger age group, 3 to 6, and maybe even a little bit further, one thing I really watch for is kids internalizing a sense of having some kind of responsibility for things happening around them. I really get concerned when I hear kids kind of blurring, they will naturally blur kind of the lines between what they can cause and what the effect is. And so it's just a great opportunity to talk to them about what's happening in the world that really has nothing to do with them. And what I love about this presentation is that it's through the libraries, and I use books a lot with young children, picking out stories where a character has to cope with some hard situation, but they've persevered and they've overcome. This is a perfect age group to just start building those skills. And similarly with older kids, they're old enough to have a sense of before COVID and after, or before something happened and later. And so what we're hoping to do is remind them frequently that that doesn't mean that we're stuck here forever, that life has changed forever. Keeping hope alive that things will get back to a little bit more normalcy, or that the things that they were looking forward to are still things that they can look forward to. We want to support them around the things that we know help kids manage anxiety or depression, because let's face it, I think pretty much everyone is a little bit anxious or depressed right now. So those routines, reassurance, praise, those are all things that can help them along the way. I would get help quickly if I felt like as a parent I was seeing a pattern of a child being more and more irritable, isolated. I have a child who has depression from prior to COVID-19, And when we did a little experiment to see if she was ready to come off of some medication she was on, a very different personality kind of came out, just kind of mean, really. And we decided right away, like, we needed to get that medication back on board. And guess what? Of all of us, she's the one doing the best. So I would say to parents who are really on the fence about bringing this up to a pediatrician, you know, it doesn't hurt to have a conversation if you're very concerned about a child being anxious or depressed. I would not be surprised to see this popping up in this age group. It's pretty common. Other ways of getting around it, if you're not quite ready to ask about medications, talking to your doctor about maybe some supplements that could help, or just improving exercise and other opportunities for kids to be kids. And then again, books work really well. And I tell people all the time, go to your librarian and say, hey, I have a kid who really could use some books about, you know, the normal challenges of childhood, and like finding some real good characters that they can sink their teeth into. And then the older group, I talk to a lot of people who are scared to ask their youth about if they have any feelings of suicide or depression, and really they're pretty honest. So my advice is just ask them if it's ever a thought that has come up for them. Or you can even say, hey, I hear that this is a big problem, you know, in people your age or in your school district. What do you think about that? We actually had a suicide in our school district on Thursday, and it was a perfect opportunity to say, oh, I heard about this. How is that affecting you? What do you think about it? Is this a problem for kids in your school? And it's remarkable that they will really share with you quite a bit of information. I will highlight that for some of our youth that have had, you know, come from harder places, if they've had a trauma history, during adolescence, it's actually a pretty natural time for their natural serotonin to drop anyway. And so it becomes even more of an essential support going into the teen years. So, you know, I'm not a doctor, but Dr. Amy's here. She can keep me honest, but it's a great opportunity to talk to a provider. Recently, I tried to get in touch with our primary care, and I was told, oh, we're actually not doing well child checks right now. Unless you have an actual problem, you know, we're not doing just check-ins, which I felt was pretty concerning. But my advice would be just to call and say, well, I do actually have something I need to talk about. It is something I need to talk about in person or over Zoom, and it can't wait. So just go ahead and push through, just as if you had had a broken bone in the family or something like that. So I would just, again, kind of turn back to like the media that they're interested in. Some of my kids have kind of gotten interested in documentaries or novels. Like a lot of the great young adult novels right now are exploring race and multiple identities. And again, turn to your librarian for help, because sometimes there are issues that kids are really willing to explore kind of on their own with a good book or some kind of media. And then Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris points out 7 things that all kids, regardless of what their age group is, they need for resilience. And honestly, we need these things too. So time out of doors, healthy, loving relationships, nutrition, sleep, some kind of mindfulness. It doesn't have to be like a meditation practice, but just a chance to check in. Right now, calendars are on sale. So I got one of those little tiny calendars, probably for like $2. And I've been challenging kids to write something they're grateful for in each box once a day, you know, whatever it is that comes up for them. Mental health supports, as we've been talking about, and exercise. And then finally, I would just remind you, like, we're all doing the best that we can. There's no playbook for any of this. And like many of you, I get up every day and I'm kind of doing a scan of the kids in my house and trying to tease apart what's normal adolescent behavior or childhood behavior and what is a real problem I need to act on, it's really hard. And so I take little notes for myself, or there is a resource that I listed that I found useful with teens. There's a depression inventory where you just circle 0, 1, 2, or 3, whether a statement is true for you or not. And I've given it to a child and I've said, hey, help me out. I'm just trying to know whether, what you're experiencing is, kind of typical for right now, or if there's something else that we need to do. And she filled it out and it was a great conversation. So you'll have access to that as well. So I'll leave it at that, and we're really interested in hearing all of your questions.
Thank you to all three of you for sharing what you have so far. And there's a ton of resources showing up in the chat here. I want to thank you for sharing those in advance so that the audience has them. You answered a lot of the questions that I posed in the introduction. So I have we have this great opportunity to deep dive right now, and I'm very excited about that. I loved your last slide, Sarah, that said eye rolls and deep sighs are good, right? And so, and I think as a parent, and I'm seeing a little bit this come through chat, how do we prevent ourselves from being alarmist? And everything seems like something if we're over focused, and we're together a lot, so we're very close to the situations that our kids are experiencing. How do we avoid being alarmist and recognize what is normal? And that's for all of you.
I can speak to that a little bit, partially from personal experience and then also just from kids that I've worked with. I think part of it, like you as a parent, if you're concerned, I would trust your gut on that. Because like I said, you do know your kids best, even when sometimes it probably feels like there's a person living in your house that you don't know if you have teens. But you really do. And I would trust your gut. I think for me, like when I was growing up, I was always really worried that I was going to get, like if I talked about my negative feelings, that I was going to get like a really big reaction, like people were going to be so worried and all this stuff was going to happen. I like was anxious about what was going to happen if I talked about my anxiety, which is part of the weird paradox that it does to your brain. So if you are going to bring it up to your kids, I would for sure, like Sarah said, if you have an adolescent, I would ask them in just a very blunt way. But I guess you can't be too alarmist. If you're worried, right? But I would not ask them in an alarmist type way, if that makes sense. Like whatever they're going to say to you, they might say something that surprises you, and just try to stay calm and to not have like a big reaction to that, I think is one of the things. Like I'll tell kids, I've been doing this for like 5 years now. It's not a super long time, but there's probably nothing you can say to me that I haven't heard before or that's going to shock me at this point. You can tell me, like, sometimes we have really scary thoughts in our head, like these intrusive thoughts, and that's not you, but it is a thought that you have, and it's scarier if you keep it to yourself. Like we need to be able to talk about it, and you can say those things to me. I'm not going to freak out. I'm not going to cry, or, all of these things. So I think that it's just important for them to know that like their worries and their thoughts are not a burden to you, and they're not going to scare you, and that you're going to help them, whatever that thought is that comes out.
I totally agree with that, Emily. And I just have to put another plug in here for self-care, because I find as a parent that I tend to get more anxious or ramped up when I haven't been doing that very thoughtful self-investment in whatever that is. I mean, scheduling that massage I've been putting off, connecting with friends in the Midwest over Zoom, because that's a thing people do now, or going out and just getting a little bit of fresh air and exercise myself. If I'm not doing those things, I do tend to kind of be a lot more emotional and freak out about small details. And I do think it is helpful to take little notes, because you could see what you think is an emerging pattern and it fizzles out over 3 days, or it's contextual. Like I had kid yesterday, I probably could have scraped off the floor with like a spatula. Like that's how low she was. But then she had a time set up with friends to go for a walk, and she came back with the biggest smile on her face ever. She couldn't stop grinning. So, right, it does depend on context and giving yourself that grace to notice not just the low points, but when a child is actually doing well.
Yeah, I want to just reemphasize everything Sarah and Emily have pointed out. I think the patterns that are not normal are really based now on very basic functions that in the past we have maybe taken for granted. So, excuse me, the child who is awake all night and sleeping during the day and not even engaging in class during the day. The child who previously did well but doesn't even go to school, much less is also failing classes. The child who is not going outside at all. I love those 7 reminders because we literally have young people who do not go outside anymore. And that is so important to be anchored to nature and just to move differently than getting up at a screen and getting back down again and staying inside. People who are not showing their normal patterns of behavior, they don't come to eat anymore. Or they're just eating all the time. People's relationship with food has really, really changed during this time. So if you're seeing any of those things with the older child, I would engage them, just like Sarah said, and ask and have a conversation. And I do want to acknowledge that having those conversations and the tone matters. And it's challenging if we're not taking care of ourselves. So what's good for us as parents is good for our children. What's bad for us is not good for them either. What's not good for us is not good for them either. So sometimes we have to step back, I think, and see where we are so we can help our children. And if we need help helping ourselves so we can help our children, we need to ask for that. It's so alarming to hear that there are places that are not doing well visits. So if your child's medical home is not doing well visits, I just strongly encourage you to ask for an appointment, even if it's not in person, via telemedicine, to express your concerns to your PA, your nurse practitioner, your pediatrician, your family doctor, because having that conversation is so important. And if you don't have access there through the medical system, at the very least, you should have access to someone for your child through the school district. And that would be another avenue to ask for help.
Thank you for your answers to that question. And I think a lot of the questions that I had ready to pose are coming through from the attendees. So I think we'll move over and go to their questions. There was a question, thank you for addressing what to do when the healthcare system is not being as responsive. I have a question for Emily. What can we realistically ask or expect of schools to help support youth mental health at this time that we're all online? And really, even though parents tend to be in the house with the kids every day, we're not necessarily with them because we're trying to work and everything just like before.
Yeah, it's such a difficult situation. Like I'm trying to work at home and I don't have kids and it's really hard. So I can't even imagine trying to balance all of that. I think part of it, I will say, depends on your school district that you're in and what resources they have available, because it seems like everyone's kind of doing slightly different things right now. So I can only speak to what Edmonds has available. I would always ask if you're concerned. You should have a school counselor, at least one or two, no matter what school you're at or what school district you're in, who is a great person to ask first if you're concerned. And they can sometimes meet with a student individually, either on Zoom or, I mean, depending on everyone's comfort level and what the school district is doing. I know that there are some people who will take like socially distanced walks with kids and stuff like that. So I would always ask. At our school, we do have some people from CHS Center for Human Services, I think, who come into the school to provide actual counseling services, like regular counseling therapy services, which are unfortunately a small number of slots per year that they're available to do that, but it is better than nothing. And I think we have that at our school, and I think they have that at one of the other middle schools in our district, but it's not at every school. So again, good to just ask the school counselor what resources are available. I meet with kids too, like if it's a check-in type thing or some kind of just psychoeducation, like, you know, can you talk to my student about these things? Because I'm not sure, maybe sometimes they don't want to hear it from their parent, right? I mean, when you're a teenager and suddenly your parents' IQs both like drop by 50 points. And so sometimes it's just nice to have sort of an objective third party person talking to them about it. And I certainly do that with kids sometimes right now on Zoom or over the phone, or I mean, whatever ends up working best for them just to get them the information. So I guess that's my answer. It depends on the school and the district, but I would start with the school counselor or the psychologist and just ask.
Thank you. Sarah and Amy, we have someone who works with infants and toddlers and teen moms. They're being supported remotely. And those previous adverse experiences are magnified at this time. What resources can we suggest for high-risk moms and little ones as they're getting overwhelmed? And again, this is specific to teen moms, but probably true for, as you mentioned, for all moms.
So from my perspective, this is an area that has been woefully underfunded in our communities. And so at the top, talking to our legislators and the people who represent us to fund those programs, I think is really important and a timely message to send. In our community, one of the resources is our early intervention services, the Toddler Learning Center. So they address issues for children birth to 3 years old. And traditionally, the focus has been on any developmental concerns for the infant. And more, we recognize that what is so important to development, as Sarah had pointed out and illustrated so beautifully in her slides, is that relationship with the parent directly affects development right away, even prenatally. So at our Toddler Learning Center or Early Intervention Service, that is something that gets addressed by family resource coordinators. So that is a good resource in our community. CADA can be another good resource. And just to go back to early intervention services, schools can refer to there, families can self-refer, and medical providers, of course, can refer families to there. So I hope I partly answered the question.
Yes, I would also add a couple of things for teen parents. The University of Washington is currently running a research project that's aimed at preventing postpartum depression in teen parents, and I believe they're still enrolling. So that's a great free resource to refer families to. Also, Perinatal Support of Washington has a warm line They also have a Spanish line. If you leave a message, that they will have someone call back in Spanish to support. And they really recommend it for fathers too. So there are groups. PEPS is also currently enrolling in Snohomish County, as well as King County, for new parent support. And while it's not specifically a depression or anxiety intervention, it absolutely does help normalize and support parents in their journey in their first year or so of parenting. So I would highly recommend that. And then, yes, in addition to early intervention, which requires a child to be eligible based on their development, there are home visiting programs parents can get enrolled in that, they're either income-based, or Child's Drive has one called Parents as Teachers that is not necessarily income-based at all. So there are some good supports out there. Reaching out to your local early intervention. Snohomish County has a central number to call, and families can easily get connected with some of those services that way.
Thank you. We've had a lot of feedback in chat that affirms people saying that they have had difficulty getting immediate responses from their primary care. So thank you for these resources that people can access immediately. I'm going to paraphrase this question a bit, but I think it will feel familiar to everybody. How do we handle devices in this time in a way that supports mental health? So for many, they're especially during the winter months, their retreat is to play video games. How do we limit that? How do we support them having access to their friends online and spending time with their friends that's in an all digital environment, and balance that total screen time recommendation?
Mm-hmm. I have one thought. I have really relaxed a lot of my parameters because of that point that this is how kids are connecting with their friends. And I think that is so essential, especially for kind of the middle school and high school age groups. So a couple of things that we've done is I have said, well, let's go out, let's do something, walk on the beach at Edmonds or go on a hike or whatever, and we'll use it as an opportunity to get those selfies that you want, right? You need something to post about, right, on your Snapchat. You need something to inspire a TikTok video, so let's go find it. And my youngest does not have a phone, probably never will have a phone if I have anything to do with it. But I'll loan her mine, and I'll say, just like the older teens, you go get those pictures. Go, if you need me to take a picture of you, I'll take a picture of you standing by that waterfall or that funky sculpture or whatever it is. So that's one thing. And then, encouraging kids to have some kind of different things that they do online too. So, you can read online, you can watch movies or documentaries or things. I think the important part is that they're learning, and you're trying to build those skills, that they're mixing it up with other things. So as opposed to saying, I will limit your time to just this and this, it's just those nudges to be like, have you thought about this? Have you tried this other thing? What if we put it down for half an hour to make cookies, and then you get to go back to it? So those are my thoughts.
I think that's really smart, that putting it in the context of, hey, you need content, right? So we need to go take a walk so that you have something to actually look at. I think that's a good idea. I would say something very similar. I mean, this is something, when we were in person school, it was still, phones were like out all the time. And but I think it's a time to be gentle with it, because it is, for some kids, the only way that they have to interact with their friends right now. And I think like the most important thing to me is just that you're continuing to engage them about it. And like Sarah said, ask them about what it is they're actually looking at, trying to stay involved so they know you're paying attention to what they're doing. And yeah, encouraging it, modeling, positive relationships with social media and things, and like even just saying those things out loud, like, oh gosh, I just scrolled on my phone for a really long time and I feel kind of icky, like I'm going to take a break, and just saying those things like out loud so that you're modeling your thoughts to them about it, so that they can just have some examples of like healthy usage. But I think to me, again, my opinion, as long as they're getting their stuff done for school and they're still talking to you and like they're generally healthy and happy, I wouldn't put too much pressure on yourself to limit all of that screen time, because we kind of just need to like survive right now. So
I would agree with what Sarah and Emily have said, that the quantity of time, we need to kind of reframe the focus from that, because that's how we're all connecting, and focus it differently, and take advantage of the screens. So people can watch movies together at the same time, or families can be watching a movie together and then talk about it, or some friends of ours introduced us to playing games together online, which was great. And planning those, creating some structure around the times that the devices are used, and still with certain precautions that are really narrow, but also very basic. Keeping the phones and screens out of the bedrooms when it's time to sleep is really important to addressing the disordered sleep we're seeing right now. Keeping your younger children in particular safe when they're online, by making sure they're not gaming with people who they don't know, or communicating with people that they don't know in real life. And still limiting screen time for our youngest children, especially ages 2 and under, because it means something different for their development. So I hope that's helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you.
One more thing I would add is just, as Dr. Amy was saying, just also having a sense, or hopefully open line of communication with your young people, that if they're seeing anything on their social media about a friend who's expressing, intent to die or thoughts of suicide or harming anyone else, that they feel comfortable coming to you and sharing that. And we have gone through that this year. It was a very good conversation, but I know that if that conversation had not happened, my child's anxiety, which already was palpable, would have shot through the roof, to feel that she was responsible for the wellness of her friend who was expressing these things online. So just one more thought about that.
I do want to add to that. You had mentioned there was a suicide this week in your school district, Sarah, and we've also lost young people in the last couple of months. It is a really important conversation for you to have with your children, that if any of their friends, or maybe even someone they just know at school but they wouldn't consider a friend, posts anything about harming themselves or doing something to themselves, that they share that with you or with a teacher at school or some other adult, so we can, that is a common phenomenon, and we can act on that and potentially help that child before something bad happens.
Thank you all. On those lines of open communication and keeping that open, we have someone ask, whenever I ask my kid how they're doing, they just say, I'm okay. And that's the end of it. So how do we prompt and open up those questions a little bit more when I'm okay is always the answer?
This comes up with the kids a lot. I run a social skills group once a week, well, 3 of them actually, but And so, because if I just went around and checked in with every kid and said, let's just say how we're doing, that's exactly what I would get to. And something at least that we do in the schools is I make it not like if you have a little scale of like, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is like you're ecstatic and 1 is like you like the worst you could feel, like where do you fall on that spectrum? So they have to pick somewhere. Now they might just pick 5 every time, but it's worth a try. And or you can do, you know, here's a handful of feelings, like which feeling word matches best where you are today. And just like give them a few options, but where they have to pick something rather than just leaving it open. I think sometimes helps.
I think that's a hard one, especially in that middle school, high school age range, because in part it's developmentally appropriate. I'm fine. I'm not fine, but I'm not telling you, mom or dad or auntie. And I think that's where we get back to, we want to respect their privacy without digging, and yet we need to know. And I think that's where doing some things together is important, because without necessarily saying, well, I know you're not fine because how can you be? None of us are fine right now. But being out on that walk or sharing a meal together or hanging out watching a movie or playing a game, that some of these things may come up, hopefully, and they'll feel comfortable saying something, or you'll notice them being irritable or impulsive or saying something that's not really like them. And you can pause and say, what's happening there? What's going on? Or what are you thinking? Or having those opener conversations. And that reminds me of a point I meant to make about the devices. If you're able, the electronic devices, to have meals together, even if it's just once a day or a few times per week, to have those times be device free is really important too. And sometimes those difficult conversations or emotions may be able to come up. I do think it's hard for our children because, as we've noted previously, a lot of times they don't have a very good emotional literacy, regardless of their age or stage. So they don't necessarily know how to talk about their feelings. And again, going forward, I think that's something where we can do better in our families and in our schools. And reading books together and talking about feelings.
Yeah. One thing that I do, I try not to ask, how are you? Because I know the answer is predictable. So I might start by saying, I notice. Like, oh, I notice you're wearing your t-shirt inside out and backwards today. Was that on purpose, or what's that all about? Or, you know, I noticed that last week, you know, you were really, you had perfect attendance in your classes, and this week you only showed up for 2 of the days. Like, tell me more, what's going on? So just starting with something that you notice, or something that, as I said before, if something you've heard. I've heard other people say their kids blah, blah, blah. What about you? Or I've heard this is an issue in the school district, and I wanted to know if that's part of your situation.
Yeah, that's something else I was thinking about. I was going to add that kind of like I said before, if they're not giving you much, you can model it and just like maybe share first and see if it piques their interest, or if they start agreeing with you. So you can say like, wow, that, you know, this thing we saw on the news, like that really bothered me. It made me feel this way. And I'm thinking about this, like, what did you think about it? And sometimes they just need it to be a little bit more indirect, because sometimes they don't actually have the language to talk about it, or they're embarrassed, or they think it's wrong. But if it's a more indirect, or kind of like out here, a little bit more abstract, I usually find that they'll, like, you can see them, their ears are like, oh, and then they sometimes start sharing a little bit more I tell a lot of, appropriate, but still like some personal stories in that group too, just to model like, this is something that used to give me anxiety and I dealt with it this way. And so, and they'll laugh at me because it was like about something silly, and then it prompts them to start sharing. So I think something like that, or a structured thing, like some families I know will do like a high and low of the day, and they'll just model that practice, and it's just what we do every day. And you may get a little bit more out of that.
Thank you. We are entering the last half hour of our time together this morning. It's flying by. Sarah, we've had a request for you to share the slide that was the 7 things slide. And maybe if you could put that up for a little bit, that would be awesome. I want to say that we're getting a ton of questions. I'm not sure that we'll get through them all, but I do want to assure our attendees that this is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. And all of the resources shared in chat will be posted in the details of that YouTube video. So they'll be available there. And we're calling these and curating our own list of resources on the Snow Isle Library's website as well. So thank you for reminding us to mention that. I have a question that really hits hard when I read it. And the question is, what does negative self-talk mean? And what do I do about it? So I'm so bad, or I'm so stupid. How do we pay attention to that, and how do we address that?
Negative self-talk. Again, we do teach to that in our little social skills group that we do, but I don't think it's talked about or taught enough in schools. I think that part of the hard part about it is that you wouldn't necessarily know that was happening unless sometimes you can hear kids or people do it out loud, which then you can kind of interrupt that thought pattern. Like, oh, would you, let's pause and think about what you just said about yourself. Like, would you ever say that about your best friend or about me or about, your sister or whoever? And most of the time they'll say, oh no, I would never say that about someone else. And then you can say, you're talking to yourself in a way you would never speak to another person. Like you're being mean to yourself. And sometimes those thoughts are super mean. Like I've hurt my own feelings before for sure. And it's a very odd sensation. If it's happening a lot, it is concerning. I think we all do it to a certain extent. Culturally, I think a little bit of it's expected, like the self-deprecation. But when it's happening a lot and you're ruminating on it, it can be really difficult. And so I think if you do hear that, like I said, interrupting it when you hear it in a gentle way, but just, I hear you not being kind to yourself and it's making me sad. And just encouraging an alternative thought pattern too, or modeling it yourself, even if you haven't heard them do it, but you're worried that that's what's going on. Modeling that, like, oh, I made a mistake and it, I feel embarrassed, but this is what I'm going to do to fix it, or something like that. Just modeling a more positive problem solving type thought pattern, I think can be helpful. But that's kind of also what I was referring to. And sometimes those thoughts can be really scary because kids don't know, where is that coming from? Does my brain, do I really think that about myself? Do other people really think these things about me? And they might not want to actually tell you what the thoughts are, because sometimes they are really cruel. So I think just, letting them know that everyone does that from time to time, but that if it's happening a lot, that it is important for them to get it out, even if they're journaling it or something, so they can look at it and see, oh, that's not right. Once it's out of your own head, it's a little bit easier to deal with. I hope that made sense.
That's great, Emily. Especially the younger the child that's having this negative self-talk or thought pattern, it can, you have to be very careful, because you want to assume first that, well, maybe they really are thinking these horrible things and believe these things about themselves. But in my experience, the younger the child, more commonly it is, it gets our attention right away as a parent often, especially if the negative self-talk is I'm going to hurt myself, or I feel like killing myself. And truly, for some of those children, that is how they're getting our attention, because we're so busy doing this and that, that's the one thing that makes us attend to them. So if you're noticing that with your child, in addition to what Emily is saying, I think it's really important to hear that as this child needs more one-on-one attention, if possible, and let it be child-directed attention, so that you give that child 10 or 15 minutes of uninterrupted, just devoted time. And that sounds like such a small thing, but it's really, really important. And a lot of kids are not able to get that for different reasons right now.
Mm-hmm. And I would just say that, as I mentioned before, I get very worried when I hear younger kids taking on responsibility for things that they couldn't possibly be responsible for, like the divorce of parents, or just a change in living circumstance that happened due to COVID-19, for example. And I think when you have those conversations, you pick up on where are you getting your information, or how did you come up with that, and let's like work through it so that you actually really understand what caused that. And that really had nothing to do with you. You're 6. There's no way you could have been the cause of that thing happening. And I agree with Emily, they're not always going to be as verbal about it, but I look to things that they are doing, like pictures. I could say, hey, draw me a picture. Draw me a picture of what it's like in this January. And they can oftentimes project a lot of what they're feeling into their drawings or into their pretend play, and just kind of being aware. I've seen my share of 7-year-olds who really are actively having suicidal thoughts, and it's not something to take lightly. And usually there are some really good treatment strategies available. So it's getting connected with those counselors that have a specific ability to work with younger children. And psychologytoday.com is a place to look, or contacting your medical insurance company and asking for referrals, just getting the ball rolling. And maybe it is something that gets worked through in just a matter of weeks, but wouldn't you rather work through something in just a couple weeks than have, a very persistent mental health problem that's following them into the next year of their school, for example?
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for putting the slide back up. We copied that text into chat, so all the participants have it now. There's a kind of a set of questions that comes together. This next question I want to ask, and we've got 4 or 5 questions along these lines. It's about smothering. So how do we stay engaged, stay communicative, make time to spend with our kids? How do we balance this with respecting their space and their emotions, with being proactive about their mental health? How do we not smother? And I think there was one more. How do we keep our child's trust and create a safe space for them to open up?
I think that's a really great question. And, one of the things that I have told other parents who are really struggling with a particular child and knowing what is the right call, whether to perhaps seek medication or some other kind of treatment strategy, is just reminding them that, kids their job is to learn and explore. Their job is not to necessarily keep track of their health and wellness. That's our job. So just as you would serve a balanced meal or limit screen time if it's going completely off the rails or whatever you have to do, you're also the one who's keeping an eye on their mental health. And so I think empowering parents to feel like this is actually part of my job, and I need to do a good job. So I'm going to follow up on the things that I think I need to follow up on. That could help. I've also completely used the cop-out, which is that I'll have talked to a child's doctor ahead of time, and I've said, look, this kid will be resistant, but I know that they need this help. And so I would really like you to talk them into it, and I'll totally back you up. But I'm going to say, doctor says, like, this is part of your health. Your mental health is part of your physical health. We don't distinguish between that. So doctor says you need it. That's my job. I follow what the doctor says.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, well, I don't know about, I guess it again depends on the teachers and people at your school, but certainly for us, we've been that a lot of times for parents, like, blame it on us. The kid can be mad at us if you want, because sometimes they really don't want to go to a group or any, counseling group, whatever it is. They don't want to go at first, which is fine. I totally get that. But they need to. And so lots of times we'll be that person for parents. So I wouldn't be, I'm used to it. We don't mind being that either for you. I think as far as like creating a balance, I will say that you aren't going to get it right all the time, and that's fine. I have literally used that word with, there was a student I can remember who I was having to support really significantly all throughout the day. And I just told him, I was like, I am working with your mom and your teachers and you, with your input too, to figure out how much of what is the right balance for you? Like, how much do I push you to go to class versus if you're really, really feeling anxious and you need a break. And some days I don't get it right because I'm really tired and, my tone was different. And some days you're having a better day and I can push you a little bit harder. And, being an older student, he was able to understand that like I was there to support him and that I'm trying to get the balance right too. And I have to push him a little bit. But that I'm not always going to, I don't always get it right. And I think that they will recognize that most of the time. But I think it's, and you have different kids who might need different amounts of support or pushing or whatever. And I think that, and it changes over time, but staying consistent with like, I am still here. There are some things that are non-negotiable. And then, these things I can give you freedom on when you're, whatever, doing these other things.
I agree. This is a really tricky question. It's hard, but just to echo what Emily and Sarah have said, I think the solution to avoid smothering is that we're all responsible for all of our children. And if we can help each other and use each other in this way, like I don't know how to do this at home. I'm going to call the counselor and see what they recommend. Maybe we could tag team, or the pediatrician or whoever's on your side. Maybe it's a religious leader, a rabbi or a pastor or a coach for a child's team, or a music director for a choir that knows your child. But to have it not just be you. And let us all work together to help the child. Hopefully, I know that's a hard thing to do, but I think that's what we need to do for our kids and for each other.
Great, thank you. We're coming to the end of our questions. We have a few outstanding ones that I want to let attendees know. We have upcoming topics in February and March scheduled for surviving online learning and also caregiver burnout. And that's for people who are caring for children and caring for elder parents. So I think we'll address some of those upcoming topics. There's so many good questions. I thank you all for participating and sharing. Dr. Amy Garrett, there was one more question. Somebody asked, is a return to bedwetting a sign of anxiety in a 3rd grader? And maybe that we could address that particular question, but also say what returning behaviors may be indicative in younger children that something's going on. And after that, I'll just ask you all to share any last thoughts, but we'll address that one first.
Okay, so maybe first a little conversation about bedwetting in general. So bedwetting is actually very common in some young people and normal. Some people don't get control of their bladder at nighttime while they're sleeping until they're far into their elementary school or middle school ages. And while this is like socially or culturally not so acceptable currently, it is physiologically normal for some children. Now, for the child who had gained bladder control at nighttime without medication, who now is wetting the bed, there's some different possibilities. One is that they're just sleeping more deeply once again, and therefore are not having control of their bladder. It could be that the child is more constipated and therefore has regressed. There could be some other disturbance in the child's sleep that's leading to this. So I don't think I'm going to be able to answer specifically for that particular child. But in general, sleep regression is happening across the board, and this would be considered part of a sleep regression. I think just like we've given, we have to give some grace or extension of limits with different things like screen time. I think the same is true with some regressed behaviors, that's a coping mechanism and perhaps even a sign of resilience, as long as it's not interfering with daily functioning. So for a child who's bedwetting again, who previously had control of that, if it's not bothering them and they're not worried about it, we just carry on and know that in the future they had control of their bladder before, and they'll have control of their bladder again in the future. And certainly if you have other concerns, it's worth talking about this particular problem with your child's medical provider. But you know, even as adults, maybe we used to nap and we weren't napping. And now during the pandemic on the weekends, we really need a nap. If that is healthy and that is okay and that is not bad, and it's important to maintaining our resilience so that we can find things to be grateful for, so that we can have hope to anchor our souls and ourselves and our families. So I think some of these regressions are important coping mechanisms that are actually healthy if we let them be.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I would not have thought of that way. I appreciate your perspective so much. I also, one of my final thoughts that I'm carrying away is the shift of importance to baby steps in this time and listening for those requests for attention and going to small goals with our kids. So, you know, maybe instead of cleaning out the closets and purging everything this weekend, it's really a more simpler 10 to 15 minutes together that will help. What in there, if you could each take a couple minutes and leave us with your parting thoughts for this morning. Thank you.
I guess we can go in the same order we started with. I'm trying to think parting thoughts. I feel like the two most important things that I think have been repeated and that I would find to be really important are to be kind to yourselves and show yourselves grace, because then you can be kind to your children and show them grace. And I think that they need to see adults modeling that like it's okay to rest. Necessary, not just okay, it's essential to rest and to like find joy, at least for like a few minutes every day. Like you deserve that as a human being, and it's really essential. So I think as much as we can, it's really, really hard, but as much as we can model that for them, I think that gives them a healthy outlook on the future. And to not be afraid at all to ask for help. And if you don't find, like you reach out to your school and you don't get a response, or you're not satisfied with the answer, keep asking or ask someone else. Because I know that it's easier said than done to ask, and then it does depend on who you've reached out to. Unfortunately, it shouldn't, but sometimes you do get different responses. And if you're not happy and you're still worried, you're the parent and you do know your kid best. And I would just be persistent with reaching out for support, because nobody can do all of this alone, and certainly not what we're going through right now. So.
Thanks, Emily. Those are my same parting thoughts. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to, that will help us take care of each other and our children. Do not hesitate to ask for help if you learned some things from today's discussion and you're still not sure about what level of concern you may need to have for your child. Ask someone and we can help you figure that out. And if your child does need help, we can hopefully point them and your family in the right direction. I think this is a time when we are learning or relearning how to be human beings, and not human doings, but human beings. And it's a little bit hard if we haven't had practice, and that's okay, but we can do it, but we have to do it together. And there's a lot to talk about, so maybe we will revisit this topic again.
Well, yes, and I echo what my colleagues have said here. And I just, I know there were a couple of questions about older adolescents, like youth in their 20s, early 20s. And I just want to say, like, hang in there, parents. And like we've said, network with maybe other parents of kids in that age group too, because we're all trying to figure it out. We're all trying to figure out how to support our young people. And in addition to COVID, they're also figuring out, other aspects of their life and trying to find jobs and trying to find ways to fit in the world, and just reassuring them that, there is hope. This is not going to be forever. You do have an important role to play in the world, and, it will get better. I think that's a big part of our role, but to do that effectively, we need one another, and we need to do that self-care at whether you're pregnant or have a middle schooler or have someone who should be off at college right now. I think the basic principles apply.
Thank you all so much. I love the idea that launching our youth could be a future topic for a panel, especially during this challenging time. Well, we'll bring this to a close this morning. We hope you've all enjoyed the program and have gained valuable information for you and your family. To learn more about Issues That Matter programs, please visit the snowisle.org Issues That Matter website. Our next event is Coping with Grief, and it will take place on Thursday, February 18th at 6:30 p.m. in the evening. Finally, we would like to thank the following organizations for their support of Issues That Matter: Snohomish County Behavioral Health Services, Island County Human Services, and the Snow Isle Foundation. Thank you all, and have a great day.